My name is Lieutenant General Rachel Thompson, and at 45 I was still fighting the same battle I'd been fighting since I was 18 years old, the battle for respect in my own family. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I sat at the mahogany dining table in my childhood home in Charleston, South Carolina, watching the familiar theater unfold around me. The annual 4th of July gathering was in full swing, and the house buzzed with the success stories of cousins who'd made partners at prestigious law firms, siblings who'd built million-dollar real estate empires, and aunts who'd authored best-selling romance novels. The mansion overlooked Charleston Harbor, its wraparound porch decorated with red, white, and blue bunting that felt almost mocking, given what was about to happen. 3 generations of the Thompson family had gathered to celebrate America's independence, while simultaneously dismissing the woman who'd spent the last 27 years defending it. My father, William Thompson, sat at the head of the table like a Southern patriarch from another era. At 72, he still commanded attention when he spoke, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd built a shipping empire from nothing. His Distinguished Service Cross from Vietnam hung in a place of honor above the fireplace, reminder of his own military service decades ago. But that was where his respect for military service ended. "Now, before we dig into Martha's famous peach cobbler," he announced, raising his crystal glass of bourbon, "I want to toast the real achievers in our family this year." The familiar knot formed in my stomach. I knew what was coming. "To my nephew James," he boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, "who just closed the biggest commercial real estate deal in Charleston's history. $43 million. That's what I call making a real impact on this community." The applause was thunder. James, my cousin who'd inherited his father's real estate business, beamed from across the table. His Rolex caught the light from the chandelier as he raised his own glass in acknowledgement. "And to my daughter-in-law Patricia," my father continued, gesturing toward my brother Michael's wife, whose interior design firm just landed the contract to renovate the governor's mansion. "She's putting the Thompson name on the map in Columbia." More applause. Patricia blushed appropriately, her perfectly manicured hands smoothing her designer dress. Then came the pause. The moment when all eyes turned to me, sitting quietly in my dress blues. The 3 stars on my shoulders were apparently invisible to everyone in the room. "And Rachel," my father said, his tone shifting to something that sounded almost like pity, "is still playing soldier, telling her little war stories." The words hit like a physical blow. Playing soldier, little war story. My mother, Eleanor, leaned across the table with that practiced smile she'd perfected over decades of charity luncheons. "Sweetheart, you know we're proud of you, but when are you going to settle down and do something substantial? Something that builds a legacy? You're 45 years." The room fell into that particular kind of Southern silence, heavy with unspoken judgments and false politeness. 37 family members sat around that table, and not one of them had any idea what those 3 stars actually meant. My nephew Tyler, Michael's son fresh out of college, chose that moment to twist the knife deeper. "Aunt Rachel, no offense, but don't you think it's time to grow up? I mean, playing army was fun when you were young, but now, my friends' parents are CEOs and surgeons. What am I supposed to tell them my aunt does? Marches around and salutes people." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel, it was dismissive. It was the sound of people who genuinely believed they were being kind while delivering the deepest possible insult. I sat there in my dress blue uniform, the same uniform I'd worn 3 weeks earlier when I'd briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff on readiness levels across 7 time zones. The same uniform I'd worn when I'd commanded 40,000 soldiers during Operation Desert Shield. The same uniform I'd worn when the Secretary of Defense had personally pinned my 3rd star on my shoulder. But to them, I was just Rachel, the spinster aunt who'd never grown out of her phase. "You know," my brother Michael added, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world, "Rachel's always been the dreamer in the family. First it was wanting to be an astronaut, then a marine biologist, now this military thing. At least she's consistent in avoiding real responsibility." Real responsibility. I commanded the entire southeastern region of the United States Army. I was responsible for training and readiness across 6 states. My decisions affected national security policy. But apparently, that wasn't real responsibility. My sister-in-law Sarah, married to my younger brother David, joined the pile-on with the enthusiasm of someone trying to prove her belonging to the family. I think it's sweet that Rachel found something she enjoys, even if it's not practical. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real business decisions. Some people need structure, routine, someone else making the hard choices for them. Structure, routine, someone else is making the hard choices. I had made the choice to deploy 15,000 soldiers to Afghanistan. I had made the choice to recommend military action in 3 separate international crises. I had made choices that determined whether Americans came home alive or in flag-draped coffins. But according to Sarah, I was just following orders like a good little soldier. The final blow came from my own father, delivered with the casual brutality that only family can manage. You know what your problem is, Rachel? You never learned the difference between playing games and building something real. Look at Michael. He's got the construction company, 3 kids, a legacy. James has his real estate empire. Even Patricia has her design business. What do you have? Stories about places nobody cares about, and people nobody knows. Stories about places nobody cares about. Those places included Iraq, where I'd led a convoy through insurgent territory to deliver medical supplies to a refugee camp; Afghanistan, where I'd coordinated the evacuation of American civilians from Kabul; Kosovo, where I'd supervised peacekeeping operations that prevented ethnic cleansing; Somalia, where I'd organized humanitarian relief that saved thousands of lives. People nobody knows. Those people included Medal of Honor recipients who'd served under my command, Pentagon officials who sought my counsel on military strategy, NATO commanders who respected my operational expertise, foreign ministers who knew my reputation for honest assessment and strategic thinking. But in this room, at this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that I didn't have a husband, children, or a business they could understand and measure. I looked around the table at faces I'd known since childhood, people who'd watched me grow up, who'd celebrated my high school graduation and college acceptance. Not one of them had ever asked about my actual work, not one had ever shown curiosity about what a lieutenant general actually does. They knew I was in the Army. They knew I'd been promoted multiple times. They knew I traveled frequently and couldn't always discuss my assignment, but they'd never connected those facts to anything meaningful. In their minds, I was still the stubborn little girl who'd insisted on joining ROTC instead of the sorority they'd preferred. I was still disappointed who'd chosen military service over marriage and motherhood. I was still the family member who didn't quite fit their vision of success. The conversation moved on to other topics: golf tournaments, vacation plans, stock portfolios. I sat in my dress blues, surrounded by family, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in a combat zone. But as the evening wore on, as the casual dismissals and gentle mockery continued, something crystallized inside me. A decision formed, cold and hard and absolutely final. This was the last time they would ever make me feel invisible. The last time they would reduce my life's work to playing soldier and telling stories. The last time they would treat 27 years of distinguished military service as a phase I needed to outgrow. Tomorrow I would make a phone call that would change everything. Tomorrow I would arrange for them to meet the woman they'd never bothered to see. Tomorrow, they would learn exactly what those 3 stars meant. I finished my peach cobbler in silence, already planning the lesson they were about to receive. The pattern of dismissal hadn't started that 4th of July evening. It had been building for decades, each small rejection laying the foundation for the profound loneliness I felt sitting at that mahogany table. I was 17 when I first announced my intention to join the military. The Thompson family was gathered in the same dining room, though the house felt different then, warmer, more welcoming, before success had hardened everyone's expectations into rigid mold. "I've been accepted to West Point," I said during Sunday dinner, my acceptance letter trembling in my hands. I'd worked 4 years for that moment. Perfect grades, varsity track, student government, volunteer work. The letter represented everything I'd dreamed of since watching my father's old Army documentaries in the basement. The silence stretched like taffy. My mother set down her fork with the precise control she'd learned in finishing school. My father continued cutting his pot roast as if I hadn't spoken. "That's nice, dear," my mother finally said, her voice carrying the tone she used when I'd brought home a finger painting from elementary school. "But you know West Point is for boys who want to be career soldiers. You'll want to transfer to a real university after a year or two." A real university, as if the United States Military Academy, founded in 1802 and producing presidents, generals and astronauts, wasn't real enough. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My brother Michael, then 15 and already showing signs of the casual cruelty that would define his adult personality, laughed outright. "Rachel wants to play G.I. Joe. That's hilarious. Wait until you see what real college is like. Sis, you'll be begging to transfer to USC by Christmas." My father finally looked up from his plate. "Rachel, sweetheart, I admire your enthusiasm, but military service is for people who don't have other options. We're Thompsons. We have options." The subtext was clear. Military service was beneath us. It was for families who couldn't afford college, who didn't have connections, who needed the structure because they lacked the intelligence for more sophisticated careers. I went to West Point anyway. For 4 years, I thrived in an environment where discipline was valued, where merit mattered more than last names, where the mission was larger than personal ambition. I graduated in the top 10% of my class, commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry. My family attended graduation with the resigned air of people fulfilling an obligation. They took the required photos, shook hands with my professors, and made polite conversation with other families who were genuinely proud of their children's achievements. But I noticed things. While other families asked detailed questions about their children's specializations, career paths, and assignment preferences, mine discussed the weather. While other parents beamed as their children received their first salute, mine checked their watches. The drive home was a masterclass in damning, with faint praise. "Well, that was certainly regimented," my mother observed, smoothing her skirt as if military discipline might be contagious. "I suppose you learned some valuable lessons about following directions." Following directions, 4 years of studying military history, engineering, leadership psychology, and international relations, reduced to learning to follow directions. My first assignment was Fort Benning, Georgia, where I would attend the infantry officer basic course before leading a platoon. I called home the night before I left, hoping for some acknowledgement of the significance of the moment. "Fort Benning," my father repeated when I told him my destination. "Never heard of it. Is that near Atlanta? Maybe you can visit your cousin Jennifer while you're in Georgia. She's doing wonderful work with her interior decorating business." Interior decorating. While I prepared to learn how to lead soldiers in combat, he was redirecting the conversation to throw pillows and color schemes. The pattern continued through every milestone. When I completed Ranger School, one of the most grueling military training programs in the world, my mother's response was to ask if I'd lost weight and suggest I consider a more feminine fitness routine. When I was promoted to captain and given command of a company of 120 soldiers, my brother Michael's reaction was to joke that I was like a camp counselor with a bigger group of kids to watch. When I earned my master's degree in strategic studies from the Army War College, while simultaneously commanding a battalion in Iraq, my sister-in-law Sarah wondered aloud why I was still taking classes instead of settling down and starting a real career. The worst moment came during my first combat deployment. I was a major then, serving as the operations officer for a brigade in Fallujah during some of the heaviest fighting of the Iraq War. For 7 months I lived in a combat outpost, coordinating air support, managing supply lines, and planning operations that kept 3,000 soldiers alive in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. I couldn't call home often, but when I did, the conversations were exercises in mutual incomprehension. I would try to share something about the work, the challenge of logistics in a hostile environment, the responsibility of making decisions that affected lives, the satisfaction of successful missions that brought everyone home safely. "That sounds very stressful," my mother would say. "Have you thought about requesting a transfer somewhere safer? Somewhere more normal?" Normal. As if there was anything normal about war, about the responsibility of command, about the weight of decisions made under fire. My father's calls were even more frustrating. He would spend 10 minutes discussing the shipping business, market fluctuations, and new contracts, then ask about my situation as if military service was a temporary condition rather than a chosen profession. "Any idea when you'll be rotating back to a desk job?" he would ask. "You're getting to an age where you need to think about your long-term prospects." Long-term prospects. I was already thinking decades ahead, planning a career that would take me to senior leadership positions, strategic planning roles, and ultimately general officer rank. But he couldn't see past his assumption that military service was a way station rather than a destination. The loneliness was profound. I was surrounded by soldiers who understood the mission, who shared the sacrifice, who knew the weight of command. But the people who were supposed to know me best, who were supposed to celebrate my achievements, remained strangers to everything that mattered most in my life. When I was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of a battalion, I called home with genuine excitement. Battalion command was a significant milestone, a validation of years of hard work and increasing responsibility. "That's nice, dear," my mother said. "Michael just bought his third house. Did I mention he's thinking about running for city council?" When I was selected for the Army War College, an honor reserved for officers identified as future senior leaders, my father's response was to suggest I consider using my government connections to help Michael's construction business bid on federal contracts. When I was promoted to colonel and given command of a brigade, my nephew Tyler asked if that meant I was like a police chief, but for Army people. Each dismissal was small, polite, wrapped in familial concern. But collectively they created a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. My family lived in a world where success was measured in dollars, square footage, and social status. I lived in a world where success was measured in mission accomplishment, soldier welfare, and national security. The two worlds seemed to have no common language. By the time I reached the rank of lieutenant general, I had stopped trying to explain my work to them. I had stopped sharing my achievements, my challenges, my pride in the soldiers I led. I attended family gatherings like a diplomat visiting a foreign country, polite, pleasant, but fundamentally separate. They had trained me to expect nothing from them, and I had learned the lesson well. But that 4th of July evening, something had shifted. The casual dismissal of my little war stories and playing soldier crossed a line I hadn't even realized existed. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, I felt something other than resignation. I felt anger. Clean, focused, and absolutely determined anger. They wanted to treat my career as a game. Fine. Tomorrow, they would learn what game they had actually been playing, and who had been winning all along. While my family dismissed my career as playing soldier, I was being forged in fires they couldn't imagine. The military doesn't just promote people for showing up. It breaks you down and rebuilds you into something stronger, something capable of bearing weight that would crush ordinary civilians. My real education began at Fort Benning, Georgia, in the sweltering heat of a southern summer that felt like training inside a furnace. Infantry officer basic course wasn't about learning to march in formation or polish boots. It was about learning to make life and death decisions under pressure that would liquefy most people's ability to think clearly. The instructors were combat veterans, men and women who'd led soldiers through hell and brought them home. They didn't care about my West Point ring or my perfect academic record. They cared about one thing: could I be trusted with the lives of American soldiers? The first test came during a night navigation exercise in the Georgia wilderness. 24 officers, dropped in teams of 4 into dense forest with nothing but a compass, map, and the knowledge that failure meant starting over. I was team leader for 3 men who'd already decided that following a woman through hostile terrain was a recipe for disaster. For 6 hours, we moved through brambles that tore at our uniforms, across streams that soaked us to the bone, around obstacles that seemed designed to break our will. My teammates questioned every decision, second-guessed every route choice, and made it clear they blamed me for every difficulty we encountered. But when we emerged at the extraction point, the only team to arrive on time and at the correct location, something fundamental shifted. The doubt in their eyes was replaced by a grudging respect that would define every relationship I'd build in the Army. I had proven myself not with words, but with results. My first platoon assignment was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division. 32 paratroopers, most of them older than me, all of them, testing whether this young female officer could handle the reality of leading combat soldiers. Staff Sergeant Martinez, a veteran of 3 deployments, made his position clear during our first formation. "Ma'am, these men have been through more combat than you've seen in movies. They'll follow orders, but they'll only follow leaders they trust. Trust isn't given because of rank, it's earned through competence." The competence test came during a live-fire exercise at Fort Knox. My platoon was tasked with conducting a simulated assault on a fortified position while coordinating with armor units and close air support. The complexity was staggering, dozens of moving parts that had to work in perfect synchronization or people would die, even in training. I spent 3 days studying the terrain, wargaming scenarios, and planning contingencies for every possible failure point. The night before the exercise, I called my family, hoping to share some of the anticipation and nervous energy. "I'm leading a major training exercise tomorrow," I told my mother. "It's the kind of operation that determines whether you're ready for combat command."
"That's nice, dear," she replied.
"Did I tell you that Patricia's interior design firm is being featured in Southern Living magazine? She's designing 3 different room layouts for the spread." Room layouts. While I prepared to coordinate artillery fire and airstrikes, she was discussing furniture arrangements. The exercise was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. My platoon moved through the assault course like a precision instrument, each soldier knowing exactly when to advance, when to provide covering fire, when to call for support. The armor arrived on schedule, the air support hit its targets with surgical precision, and the objective was secured with 0 casualties. After the debrief, Captain Rodriguez, the exercise controller, pulled me aside. "Lieutenant Thompson, in 15 years of running these exercises, I've seen maybe 5 platoon leaders execute with that level of coordination. You've got a gift for this work." A gift. The word stayed with me as I progressed through increasingly challenging assignments. What my family saw as an extended phase of playing dress-up, I experienced as a systematic development of capabilities they couldn't comprehend. Ranger School was the ultimate test. 61 days of deliberate stress designed to push officers beyond their breaking points and identify those who could function when everything went wrong. The physical challenges were brutal. We operated on minimal sleep, inadequate food, and constant pressure. But the mental challenges were worse. During the mountain phase in Georgia, I was assigned as patrol leader for a mission to capture a high-value target in simulated enemy territory. The weather was unseasonably cold, my radio operator had hypothermia, and our planned route was blocked by a swollen creek that made our maps useless. With 20 rangers depending on my decisions, I had to completely redesign the operation in real time. New route, new timeline, new coordination with supporting elements. The mission succeeded, but barely, and only because I'd learned to think through problems that had no clear solutions. The Ranger instructor's evaluation was direct. "Thompson, you don't just adapt to chaos, you impose order on it. That's what separates competent officers from exceptional ones." My family's reaction to my Ranger tab was typically dismissive. "I'm sure that was very challenging," my father said when I called to share the news. "Michael just closed a deal for a shopping center development. The profit margin is going to be outstanding." Profit margins. While I'd proven I could lead soldiers through the worst conditions imaginable, he was discussing retail real estate. The progression continued through Command and General Staff College, where I studied the art and science of military operations at the strategic level. While my classmates were mostly majors with 10 to 15 years of experience, I was absorbing lessons from warfare across centuries, learning how great commanders had solved impossible problems with limited resources. The coursework was intellectually demanding in ways that made West Point seem simple. We studied Napoleon's campaigns, analyzed Patton's rapid advances, and dissected MacArthur's amphibious operations. But more importantly, we learned to think like generals, to see entire theaters of operation, to coordinate multiple divisions, to balance competing priorities across thousands of miles. My thesis project focused on logistics management in multi-domain operations, examining how modern commanders could sustain large formations across air, land, sea, space, and cyber domains simultaneously. The analysis required understanding supply chains, transportation networks, technological capabilities, and enemy countermeasures. When I presented my findings to a panel of senior officers, Colonel Stevens, the course director, made a comment that changed my trajectory. "Major Thompson, this isn't just academic work, this is strategic thinking at the highest level. You're ready for much greater responsibility." Greater responsibility came in the form of battalion command. 800 soldiers, a budget in the tens of millions, and accountability for readiness across multiple mission sets. The weight of command was unlike anything I'd experienced. Every decision affected hundreds of lives. Every training exercise prepared soldiers for combat they might face next month. Every evaluation determined careers and families. My battalion specialized in rapid deployment operations, the kind of unit that gets the call when situations deteriorate faster than conventional forces can respond. We trained for everything from humanitarian relief to special operations support to conventional warfare against peer adversaries. The tempo was relentless. We deployed to 3 different continents in 18 months, conducting missions that never made the news but kept America's enemies awake at night. In Eastern Europe, we trained with NATO allies preparing for potential Russian aggression. In Africa, we provided security for humanitarian operations in regions where governments had collapsed. In the Pacific, we conducted exercises designed to deter Chinese expansion. Each deployment required mastering different cultures, terrain, languages, and political sensitivities. I wasn't just a military commander, I was a diplomat, strategist, and crisis manager, operating in environments where mistakes could trigger international incidents. Through it all, my family continued to see my career as an extended vacation from real responsibility. When I called home from a forward operating base in Estonia, coordinating training with 6 different allied nations, my mother asked if I was enjoying my government travel and whether I'd been able to do any sightseeing. Sightseeing? While I was strengthening the NATO alliance and deterring World War III, she thought I was on a taxpayer-funded European vacation. But the soldiers I led understood. They knew that competence in their commander meant the difference between coming home whole or coming home in pieces. They evaluated my decisions not based on family connections or social status, but on results that mattered more than life itself. That respect, earned through proving myself in the crucible of command, was worth more than any recognition my family could offer. While my family continued to view my career as an elaborate form of playing dress-up, I was ascending to levels of responsibility that would have left them speechless if they'd bothered to understand what those positions actually entailed. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in April. I was reviewing readiness reports in my office at Fort Stewart when my encrypted phone buzzed with a priority message. The caller ID showed only a number I didn't recognize, but the security classification told me this wasn't a routine conversation. "Colonel Thompson, this is General Patricia Hayes, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. I need you in my office at the Pentagon tomorrow morning at 0800. This is regarding your next assignment." The Pentagon. Not just any meeting at the Pentagon, but with the 3-star general who controlled operational assignments for the entire Army. I'd been expecting new orders eventually. Colonel-level officers moved frequently to broaden their experience, but a personal summons from General Hayes suggested something extraordinary. The flight to Washington gave me time to consider the possibilities. Brigade command was the logical next step, leading 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers in a formation that could deploy anywhere in the world. But something about the urgency and secrecy of the summons suggested a different kind of opportunity. General Hayes's office occupied a corner of the Pentagon's 3rd floor, with windows overlooking the Potomac River and the sprawling metropolis of Northern Virginia beyond. The walls displayed maps of global military operations, unit patches from every major command, and photographs of the general with heads of state from dozens of countries. She was a legend in the army, the first woman to command an airborne division in combat, architect of the counterinsurgency strategy that turned the tide in Iraq, and widely regarded as the most operationally brilliant officer of her generation. Her presence was magnetic in the way that only comes from having made decisions under fire that saved thousands of lives. "Colonel Thompson," she began without preamble, "I've been watching your career progression for the past 5 years. Your performance in command has been exceptional, but more importantly, your strategic thinking has caught the attention of people at the highest levels of government." She activated a secure display screen that showed an organizational chart I'd never seen before. At the center was a unit designation that made my pulse quicken. Joint Special Operations Command, Strategic Planning Division. "This is a new billet we're creating," General Hayes continued. "The nature of warfare is changing faster than our institutional responses can adapt. We need officers who can think beyond traditional doctrine, who can integrate capabilities across all domains, who can plan operations that haven't been invented yet." The scope of the position was staggering. I would be responsible for developing operational concepts for conflicts that might not occur for decades, integrating emerging technologies with human capabilities, and planning scenarios that spanned multiple continents and all domains of warfare simultaneously. "The position comes with a promotion to Brigadier General," she said, watching my face carefully. "You'd be the youngest woman ever promoted to general officer rank in the combat arms. The responsibility includes oversight of classified programs that I can't discuss until you accept the position and complete additional security processing." Brigadier General. 1 star. The threshold between senior officer and strategic leader, between tactical expertise and institutional influence. At 39 years old, I would be entering a realm of responsibility that most officers never reached regardless of age. But General Hayes wasn't finished. "There's something else you need to understand about this assignment. The work you'll be doing will be almost entirely classified. Your family, your friends, most of your Army colleagues, they won't be able to know what you actually do. You'll become invisible in plain sight." Invisible in plain sight. The phrase captured something I'd already been experiencing with my family, but now it would be institutionalized, protected by federal law and national security requirements. I accepted the position immediately. The transition to JSOC was like entering a parallel universe that existed alongside the conventional military but operated by completely different rules. My office was located in a building that didn't appear on public maps, accessible only through security checkpoints that required biometric identification and daily code words. My first briefing covered threats and capabilities that sounded like science fiction, cyber weapons that could shut down entire electrical grids, autonomous systems that could conduct precision strikes without human intervention, information warfare campaigns that could destabilize governments without firing a shot. But the most sobering element was the timeline. Every scenario I was tasked to plan for assumed conflict with near-peer adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, within the next decade. The peaceful world my family inhabited, where their biggest concerns were profit margins and social status, existed only because people like me were preparing for wars they hoped would never come. My team consisted of 12 of the most brilliant military minds I'd ever encountered: Marine colonels who'd redesigned amphibious warfare doctrine, Air Force officers who understood space-based weapon systems, Navy commanders who'd pioneered underwater drone operations, CIA analysts who could predict political instability months before it manifested. Together, we developed operational plans for scenarios that kept the National Security Council awake at night. What would the American response look like if China invaded Taiwan? How could NATO forces defend the Baltic states against a Russian offensive that combined conventional forces with cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns? What if Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz while simultaneously launching terrorist attacks against American targets worldwide? Each scenario required coordinating thousands of variables across multiple theaters of operation. We weren't just planning military movements, We were designing integrated campaigns that included diplomatic initiatives, economic warfare, information operations, and covert activities that spanned years and involved dozens of allied nations. The promotion ceremony to brigadier general was held in a secure conference room with an audience of 12 people, all of whom held security clearances higher than most senators. General Hayes pinned the single star on my shoulder while photographers captured images that would never be published and never be seen by anyone outside the intelligence community. My family knew I'd been promoted. I was required to inform them for security purposes, but they had no concept of what the promotion meant. When I called home with the news, my mother's response was predictably underwhelming. "That's wonderful, dear. Does this mean you'll be getting a desk job finally?" "Something more stable, a desk job." I was now responsible for planning global conflicts that could determine the survival of democratic civilization. But she was relieved that I might finally be settling into something resembling normal office work. My father's reaction was even more telling. "Damnola, that sounds impressive. Can you use your new position to help Michael's construction company bid on some of those big government contracts? Military bases must need a lot of building work." He saw my star not as recognition of strategic capability, but as a networking opportunity for my brother's business. Within 6 months of assuming the position, I was briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff monthly on emerging threats and operational concepts. Within a year, I was presenting strategic assessments to the National Security Council. Within 18 months, I was accompanying the Secretary of Defense to NATO headquarters for classified discussions about alliance readiness. The work consumed every hour of every day. Threats evolved constantly. Technology advanced faster than doctrine could adapt, and geopolitical situations shifted like weather patterns that could produce storms with nuclear consequences. When North Korea conducted missile tests that demonstrated intercontinental range capability, my team provided the operational assessments that guided American diplomatic and military responses. When Russian forces massed on the Ukrainian border, our contingency plans became the foundation for NATO positioning decisions. When Chinese naval forces began aggressive patrols in the South China Sea, our analysis shaped American freedom of navigation operations. My family remained oblivious to these global responsibilities. During our quarterly phone calls, they shared updates about business deals, vacation plans, and social events, while I listened with the surreal knowledge that I'd spent the previous week planning responses to potential nuclear scenarios. The promotion to Major General came 2 years ahead of the normal timeline, recognition of work that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, but had influenced national policy at the highest levels. 2 stars represented a level of institutional authority that placed me among the senior strategic leaders of the American military. The ceremony was even more restricted than my first promotion. Just 6 attendees in a room where cell phones were prohibited and windows were covered with classified material warnings. But the weight of the second star felt different, heavier, carrying the accumulated responsibility of decisions that affected millions of lives across multiple continents. My nephew Tyler, now finishing college, chose that moment to ask his annual question about my career during a family phone call. "Aunt Rachel, when are you going to get a real job? I mean, you're like 42 now. Shouldn't you be thinking about starting a business or something productive?" Productive. While he struggled through undergraduate business classes, I was developing strategies that protected the economic system he planned to enter, the democratic institutions he took for granted, and the peaceful world he assumed would always exist. But the most significant moment came during my 3rd year as a general officer, when I received an invitation that would change the trajectory of everything. A personal request from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to join his strategic planning staff as his principal advisor on multi-domain operations. The position came with a promotion to Lieutenant General, 3 stars, and responsibility for coordinating the highest levels of American military strategy across all branches of service and allied nations. I was 44 years old, the youngest 3-star general in the active army, responsible for strategic decisions that influenced global stability. My security clearance gave me access to information that only a handful of people worldwide possessed. My recommendations shaped foreign policy decisions that affected billions of lives. And my family still thought I was playing soldier, telling little war stories, avoiding real responsibility. The irony was perfect, and it was about to become devastatingly clear to everyone who'd ever dismissed my career as an elaborate game. The morning after that disastrous 4th of July dinner, I sat in my Pentagon office watching the sunrise paint the Potomac River gold, while sipping coffee that had been cleared through 3 different security protocols. The decision I'd made the night before had crystallized into something harder than diamond and twice as sharp. My secure phone showed 17 missed calls from various family members, all of them probably wondering why I'd left the gathering so abruptly. But their concern wasn't for me, it was for the family image, the social harmony they prized above truth or genuine relationship. The first call came from my brother Michael at 0647 hours. I let it go to voicemail. Rachel, it's Michael. Look, I know Dad can be direct sometimes, but you know he loves you, right? He's just worried about your future. We all are. You can't stay in the military forever. Call me back. The condescension in his voice was remarkable. Here was a man whose greatest accomplishment was inheriting a construction business, lecturing a 3-star general about career planning. The second call came from my mother. 30 minutes later, her voice carrying that particular brand of Southern steel wrapped in velvet. Rachel, sweetheart, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this military phase has gone on long enough. You're 45 years old. It's time to come home and build a real life. Military phase. 27 years of service, 3 stars and global responsibility dismissed as a phase, but it was the third call that sealed their fate. My nephew Tyler, calling from his fraternity house at the University of South Carolina, his voice thick with the kind of arrogance that only comes from never having been tested by anything more challenging than a midterm exam. Aunt Rachel, my friends saw the news about you storming out of dinner on social media. It's kind of embarrassing for the family. You know, like maybe you should talk to someone about anger management or whatever. Playing army must be really stressful. Playing army. The phrase that had haunted me since childhood, delivered with casual cruelty by a 21-year-old who'd never worked a day in his life. I deleted all 3 voicemails without listening to them completely, and activated the secure line to place a call that would change everything. General Morrison's office. This is Colonel Stevens. Colonel, this is Lieutenant General Thompson. I need to speak with the General about a personal matter that affects operational security. General James Morrison was my direct superior, the 4-star general who served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was also, as it happened, someone who knew my father from a lifetime ago. Rachel, General Morrison said when he came on the line, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd watched me rise through the ranks with paternal pride. What can I do for you? Sir, I have a family situation that requires some clarification. I'd like to request permission to reveal my current position and responsibilities to my immediate family members. The operational security risk is minimal. They have no connections to foreign nationals or defense contractors. There was a pause while he considered the implications. Rachel, your family doesn't know what you actually do. Sir, they think I'm playing soldier and telling war stories. They've spent 27 years dismissing military service as a phase I need to outgrow. His laugh was dry and knowing. I see, and you'd like to provide them with some education. Yes, sir. I believe it would be instructive. Rachel, there's something you should know. I served with your father in Vietnam. Same battalion, 1st Infantry Division. We were both 2nd lieutenants, fresh out of OCS. Bill Thompson was a good soldier, brave, competent, and took care of his men. The information hit me like a physical blow. My father had never mentioned serving with anyone named Morrison. He'd never mentioned his fellow officers at all, actually. His war stories focused on individual heroism and dramatic moments, never on the relationships that defined military service. Sir, he's never mentioned you. I'm not surprised. We had different perspectives on what military service meant. Bill saw it as something to endure, a stepping stone to civilian success. I saw it as a calling. After the war, he went into business and made millions. I stayed in the army and dedicated my life to serving something larger than myself. The parallel was striking and painful. My father had chosen wealth over service, personal success over institutional commitment. I had made the opposite choice, and he'd never understood why. Sir, would you be willing to meet with him to help him understand what military service actually means at the senior levels? Rachel, I'd be honored. Your father needs to understand that his daughter isn't playing games. She's one of the most respected strategic minds in the American military. When would you like to arrange this meeting? The opportunity was perfect, but I wanted to orchestrate it carefully. My family's arrogance needed to be exposed in a way that would leave lasting impact, not just momentary embarrassment. Sir, my family is hosting a Labor Day barbecue at their estate in Charleston. It's their annual gathering to show off their success to the community. What if you happen to be in the area for an inspection visit to Fort Jackson? Fort Jackson was less than 2 hours from Charleston, well within the range of a legitimate military inspection tour. General Morrison's presence at a family gathering would seem coincidental rather than orchestrated. Consider it done. I'll arrange an inspection visit to Fort Jackson for Labor Day weekend. Purely routine, of course. The next 6 weeks were spent in careful preparation. I briefed General Morrison on my family dynamics, their business interests, and their social pretensions. I provided detailed profiles of each family member, their achievements, and their attitudes toward military service. More importantly, I prepared myself mentally for what was coming. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. For 27 years I'd accepted their dismissal because I'd internalized their values, measuring my worth by their standards. But those days were ending. My family, meanwhile, launched a campaign to bring Rachel to her senses. The phone calls came daily, each one more condescending than the last. My sister-in-law, Patricia, called to share job listings from Charleston area design firms. Rachel, I could put in a good word for you. With your attention to detail from all that military training, you'd make a wonderful project coordinator. Project coordinator. A woman who coordinated multi-billion-dollar defense programs across 17 time zones, reduced to managing fabric samples and paint choices. My cousin James called with real estate opportunities. Rachel, I've got some properties that would be perfect for someone starting over at your age. Nothing too expensive. We know the military doesn't pay well, but they're in good neighborhoods where you could build a normal life. Starting over. Normal life. The phrases that had defined their expectations for me since I was 18 years old. The most insulting call came from my brother David, who'd always been the sensitive one in the family. Rachel, we're all worried about you. This military obsession isn't healthy. Have you considered therapy? I know an excellent psychiatrist in Charleston who specializes in helping people transition out of rigid institutional environments. Rigid institutional environments. The United States Army, the organization that had produced Washington, Grant, Eisenhower, and Powell, dismissed as a cult-like institution that needed professional intervention to escape. But the final straw came from my father himself, calling with the imperious tone he used when delivering ultimatums to business competitors. Rachel, this nonsense has gone on long enough. You're going to be 46 soon. Michael has graciously offered to create a position for you in his company. Administrative work. Nothing too demanding. It's time to come home and be part of this family instead of playing dress-up in Washington. Playing dress-up. The woman who briefed the president on national security threats was playing dress-up. Dad, I said quietly, I'll be at the Labor Day barbecue, and I'm bringing a friend. A friend? Rachel, this is a family gathering, not a place for your military buddies to tell war stories. His name is General Morrison. I think you might remember him. The silence stretched for 30 seconds before he spoke again, his voice uncertain for the first time in the conversation. Morrison? James Morrison. The same. He's looking forward to seeing you again after all these years. I hung up before he could respond, already imagining the frantic phone calls that would follow as he tried to remember everything he'd ever said about his military service. Every story he'd embellished, every claim he'd made about his war record. The trap was set. In 4 weeks, my family would finally meet the woman they'd never bothered to see. They would learn what those 3 stars actually meant. They would understand the difference between playing soldier and being a general, and they would never dismiss my service again. Labor Day weekend arrived with the oppressive heat and humidity that made Charleston summers feel like living inside someone's mouth. The Thompson family estate buzzed with preparation for their annual showcase. The gathering where they displayed their accumulated wealth and social status to Charleston's elite, like peacocks spreading their feathers. I arrived at noon, wearing my dress blue uniform with the 3 stars gleaming on my shoulders and 17 rows of ribbons, telling the story of a career my family had never bothered to read. The Medal of Honor parking spots in the circular driveway were occupied by luxury vehicles that cost more than most people's annual salaries: BMWs, Mercedes, a few Porsches, and my brother Michael's new Bentley. My rental car, a modest sedan provided by the Pentagon Motor Pool, looked distinctly out of place among the automotive status symbols. The first person to greet me was my nephew Tyler, now 22 and carrying himself with the inflated confidence of someone who'd never faced genuine adversity. He looked at my uniform with barely concealed amusement. "Aunt Rachel, you know this is a casual barbecue, right? You don't have to wear your costume. Nobody's going to think less of you for dressing normally." Costume, the uniform that represented 27 years of distinguished service, worn by presidents and generals, was dismissed as a costume by a boy who considered flip-flops formal wear. Before I could respond, my mother appeared at the front door, her face carrying that practiced smile she deployed for challenging social situations. "Rachel, sweetheart, you look very official. But don't you think the uniform is a bit much for a family gathering? People might get the wrong impression." The wrong impression, as if honoring my service was somehow embarrassing to the family brand. My father emerged from his study, his face pale and drawn in a way I'd never seen before. 4 weeks of anticipating this moment had clearly taken their toll. He'd probably spent sleepless nights trying to remember every detail of his service with James Morrison, every story he'd told, every embellishment he might have added over the decades. "Rachel," he said carefully, as if testing each word before speaking it, "you said you were bringing General Morrison." "James Morrison? That's right, Dad. He should be here within the hour. He's finishing up an inspection at Fort Jackson and driving down afterward." The color drained completely from his face. Whatever memories he was wrestling with, they weren't pleasant ones. The backyard was already filled with Charleston's social elite: judges, bank presidents, successful attorneys, prominent physicians. The usual crowd of people who measured worth in dollars and acres, people who'd built their identities around accumulating symbols of success. I moved through the gathering like a ghost at a wedding, receiving polite nods and curious glances, but no real engagement. These people knew I was military, but they had no frame of reference for understanding what that meant, beyond the stereotypes they'd absorbed from movies and television. At 1:47 p.m., exactly when he'd promised, General Morrison's motorcade turned into the circular driveway. 2 black SUVs with government plates, followed by a sedan carrying his aide-de-camp and security detail. The kind of arrival that made everyone stop talking and stare. The man who stepped out of the lead vehicle was exactly what central casting would order for a 4-star general: tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His dress blue uniform was identical to mine except for one crucial detail: 4 stars instead of 3. My father stood frozen on the back patio, watching his past walk directly toward his present. General Morrison's approach was textbook military, direct, purposeful, radiating the quiet confidence that comes from having made decisions under fire that affected thousands of lives. He surveyed the gathering with the analytical eye of someone trained to assess situations quickly and accurately. When he spotted me near the pool, his face broke into a genuine smile. "Rachel," he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. "There's my star pupil." Every conversation in the backyard stopped. 60 of Charleston's most prominent citizens turned to watch a 4-star general embrace a woman they'd assumed was their host's disappointing daughter. But General Morrison wasn't finished with his entrance. His aide-de-camp, a sharp-looking colonel, approached carrying a leather portfolio. "Sir, the citation you requested." Yes," General Morrison said, opening the portfolio and retrieving a document that bore multiple official seals. "Rachel, before I forget, the president asked me to deliver this personally." He handed me a certificate that made my hands tremble despite years of training to remain composed under pressure. It was a presidential unit citation, signed by the President of the United States, recognizing my strategic planning division for exceptional performance in developing operational concepts that enhanced national security and strengthened allied partnerships. The citation was real. I'd known it was coming, but the timing and presentation were pure theater, orchestrated for maximum impact. General Morrison then turned to address the gathering, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd briefed heads of state and commanded armies. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but I couldn't pass through Charleston without visiting one of America's finest military minds." He gestured toward me with obvious pride. "Lieutenant General Rachel Thompson has spent the last 5 years as my principal strategic advisor on multi-domain operations. Her analysis and recommendations have shaped American military policy across 3 continents and influenced NATO doctrine for the next decade." The silence was absolute. These people, who spent their lives navigating social hierarchies and measuring relative importance, were suddenly recalculating everything they thought they knew about the Thompson family dynamics. My father looked like he'd seen a ghost from his own past materialize to judge his present choices. General Morrison wasn't finished. Rachel's division developed the operational plans that deterred Chinese aggression in the South China Sea last year. Her threat assessment was instrumental in NATO's response to Russian positioning along the Ukrainian border, and her integration protocols for cyber warfare capabilities are now standard across all unified commands. Each sentence was a precision strike designed to shatter the family narrative about my little war stories and playing soldier. But perhaps most importantly, General Morrison continued, his eyes finding my father in the crowd, "She represents the best traditions of American military service, the same traditions that her father and I were privileged to serve during our time together in Vietnam." The recognition hit my father like a physical blow. After 30 years of constructing his post-war identity around business success and social status, his past was suddenly present, embodied in this 4-star general, who remembered the young lieutenant he'd once been. General Morrison approached my father with the measured pace of someone who'd spent decades learning to read people's character in their eyes. "Bill Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." My father's handshake was weak, uncertain. "James, I didn't. I'm sure you didn't. But I couldn't visit your daughter without paying my respects to an old comrade." General Morrison's tone was cordial but carried undertones that only my father could fully interpret. "Your daughter," he continued, "has achieved something remarkable. She's reached the highest levels of military command through pure merit, tactical brilliance, strategic vision, and the kind of leadership that inspires absolute loyalty from subordinates." The contrast was implicit, but devastating. Here was the man my father could have become if he'd chosen service over wealth, dedication over comfort, something larger than himself over personal accumulation. My brother Michael, who'd spent decades lecturing me about real responsibility and productive careers, stood speechless as he absorbed the reality that his sister commanded armies while he managed construction projects. My mother, who'd worried about my financial stability and marriage prospects, was recalculating the social mathematics of having a 3-star general as a daughter. Tyler, who'd dismissed my career as playing army, was staring at the presidential citation with the dawning realization that his aunt operated at levels of government he'd never imagined. General Morrison delivered the final stroke with surgical precision. "Bill, your daughter is being considered for promotion to full general. 4 stars. If confirmed, she'll be one of only 7 active-duty 4-star generals in the United States Army, the youngest woman ever to reach that rank. 4 stars." the pinnacle of military achievement reserved for officers who shaped global strategy and commanded entire theaters of operation. My father's voice, when he finally found it, was barely a whisper. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, General Morrison replied, his tone gentle but pointed. Rachel operates in a world where success can't be measured in profit margins or quarterly reports. She serves something larger than personal ambition. The gathering remained frozen in stunned silence as the implications settled over them like fallout from a detonated assumption. Everything they'd believed about success, achievement, and family hierarchy had just been revealed as provincial and embarrassingly narrow. I finally spoke, my voice carrying the quiet authority I'd learned from commanding soldiers who'd follow orders that might cost them their lives. General Morrison, thank you for taking time from your inspection schedule to visit. I know your time is valuable. Not at all, Rachel. Visiting family is always a priority. The word family carried weight. This was my real family, forged through shared service and mutual respect. As General Morrison prepared to leave, he turned back to address my father one final time. Bill, you should be enormously proud of what your daughter has accomplished. She's brought honor to your family name in ways that will be remembered long after we're all gone. The motorcade departed as precisely as it had arrived, leaving behind a family gathering that had been fundamentally transformed. The social elite of Charleston dispersed in small groups, their conversations focused entirely on the revelation they'd just witnessed. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was no longer playing soldier or telling little war stories. I was Lieutenant General Rachel Thompson, strategic advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, one of the most powerful military officers in the world, and my family would never see me the same way again. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.